John Curtice is with us. Morning, John.
Thank you, Matt.
John, your overall assessment of the picture. Lots of people saying that this is a landslide win for Labour, but it is wide and shallow, and it's as much about the success of reform as it is the success of Keir Starmer. What's your analysis?
Yes, I mean, the principal way I would characterise it is that the electorate rejected the Conservatives very firmly, but then were willing to spread their favour in whatever direction seemed best able to express their discontent with the Conservatives. And certainly the crucial aspect of that is that the foundations of the Tory citadel were seriously eroded by the rise of Reform, who looks as though they got around 15% of the vote. And all the Reform themselves only picked up 4 seats, but they paved the way for the Conservatives for Labour to profit, where they started off in second place to the Conservatives, which is where Labour secured their best performances outside of Scotland, at least. And the Liberal Democrats, meanwhile, were able to profit in places where they started off from the Conservatives, where they undoubtedly profited. But, you know, there is a vast difference between Labour's share of the vote, which is around 35%, less than Tony Blair got on all 3 of his election victories, let alone what Jeremy Corbyn got in 2017, and their share of the seats in the House of Commons, which is around 2/3. So it looks as though Labour have been given this ringing endorsement, but in practice, the party's done little more than hold its 29% share of the vote. But because the Conservative vote has fallen away that's so disastrous for the Conservatives, Labour have profited.
Patrick.
John, it's Patrick Maguire here. Were you surprised, as some people at the top of the Labour Party were, that they ended up losing 5 seats to pro-Gaza independence? Because often what you heard from senior Labour people was, look, the numbers and the proportions of voters in the seats are such that we'd never lose seats, even if every Muslim voter defected. So what do you think went on there?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, I think undoubtedly the point is that these independent candidates were able, in these circumstances, to gather in a considerable discontent about Gaza, which isn't confined to those who identify as Muslim. It's also felt more widely inside the Labour Party. So therefore, if you've got a potential credible pro-Gaza candidate, then they probably were able to pick up support from elsewhere. So you're right. But the truth is, Patrick, these are the kinds of contests that none of us can forecast from opinion polls. Nobody, frankly, can forecast from mega polls either. It does mean, however, it's one again, the many, many different ways in which this parliament is unique, is that we've got 5 independent people, including Jeremy Corbyn, elected to this House of Commons. I reckon that's more independent MPs than at any time since we got rid of the university seats, which is when we used to get independence back in the 1950 election. Labour did in the end lose quite noticeably on the Gaza issue.
Interesting, before I let you go, John, we've had a message in from listener Roy, who's noted that the Lib Dems are lauding their success in the election under first past the post. If PR was applied, they wouldn't have as many seats because they've managed to get 71 seats on only 12% of the vote.
Yeah, I think that's roughly proportionate. But yeah, the irony is that they've more or less managed to do proportionately. Though I think the truth is this is going to be the most disproportional election we've ever had. It's Reform with 15% of the vote and only 4 seats who can complain. It's Reform with it's the Greens with 7% of the vote and only 4 seats who can complain. And frankly, it is the Conservatives with 24% of the vote and only 122 seats who can complain.
John, always good to speak to you. John Curtice, thanks very much for joining us. I know you've had a long night, so we really appreciate you joining us this morning.
Can you go through some of the numbers for us and just explain how big is this? Is it fair to say it's huge, but it's not what was predicted?
Yes, I think it's fair to say it's huge. It's not what was predicted. There are pockets of difficulty for Keir Starmer in these results. It was not a night of totally smooth sailing. There will have been moments where Starmer will have been wincing, I imagine. There were a couple of defeats from those on his shadow front bench. And indeed, we came within a hair's breadth of losing Wes Streeting, of course, the shadow health secretary.
Which is mad, isn't it?
Which is completely extraordinary and will have been beyond beyond the imagination of anyone around Keir Starmer, you would think. But nonetheless, the overwhelming story is a massive Labour majority, over 400 seats. And of course, with that, a total collapse in Conservative support and among their worst results in history. This is, whichever way you spin it, a very bitter defeat for the Conservatives. Few will try and put a positive spin on that. I think one of the interesting stories going into today, particularly for Starmer now, will be some turning their attention to the left of the party, not least because of those strong independent challenges that we saw, also because Jeremy Corbyn was elected as an independent in Islington North, and also because he has set out, I think, the main challenge to Starmer from this election, which is that turnout was down. The Labour vote share is only slightly up on 2019. It may not even be on 2017 levels. And that in his view, and the view of some of those that will be challenging him and putting pressure on him in his first few days in government, this is not the resounding mandate that some on Labour think it is. And I think that will be one of the interesting challenges to watch from him in the days ahead.
Now, very quickly, before we go to what Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak have said so far, the other parties, Lib Dems, as expected, surged. SNP, catastrophic for them.
Completely catastrophic for them. Literally half a dozen, just over, seats. I mean, a complete collapse in their support. And I think another reminder that when we look at this Labour victory, we do need to be quite careful about realising and remembering that it is a perfect confluence of events for them. It is a total collapse of support from the SNP in Scotland. It is a total collapse of support for the Conservative Party south of the border and indeed also north of the border. But within that, you need to, I think, understand just how those two massive self-inflicted crises that consume both the Conservative Party and the SNP party over the past year and slightly longer has contributed to this Labour success. And I think that's another reason why we just need to be slightly careful going into today, not to say that Keir Starmer is certainly on for a full decade of national renewal, as he has said he would like a mandate to have before. This is a big success, but it is one that we must still qualify.
Now, the exit poll said that, because I was up for that, perhaps foolishly, I'm slightly regretting it now, but anyway, the exit poll said Reform would get 13 seats and they've got 4 so far. And this is something that I think, again, worth watching very closely. We're still waiting for, obviously, some of the results to come in, but for Nigel Farage, he will look at his resounding victory in Clacton and I think take from that that this is a solid base from which Reform can build. Of course, he only entered the campaign, midway through. And I think even though they haven't clinched the full number of seats they were hoping for, Farage was very open about not knowing where that ceiling was. And the big story from them is the fact that they have contributed to scores more Conservative losses than would otherwise have happened. It is not that Reform is the big force in Parliament now. It is the fact that this Conservative wipeout would look completely different if Reform hadn't stood in the way that they have.